Welcome to Viva. Today, in this video, I will go over a sort of a primer on the discernment of spirits. The discernment of spirits come from St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises and are a sort of a breakout piece that the spiritual exercises cover a whole lot of stuff. And a lot of it a lot of what's written in that book comes down to exercises, things to help build you up, things to help make you strong enough to understand God's will and to fulfill it. When we're talking about discernment of spirits, we're really just talking about figuring out what different influences have an effect on you, and then once you know that, that automatically will help you to fulfill it, to have the will to fulfill it. So, not I say automatically. Once you've given yourself to it and understand it, and you can then work harder to reject it or to accept it, depending on where that influence is coming from. So before we can get started, we have to at least mention the first principle and foundation. This is key to understanding all of the spiritual exercises, but suffice it to say, I'm going to sum it up in just a few points. Number one, God is almighty, and therefore God has a right to tell you what to do. God has a right to tell you what to do. He can command you. It's not just like he gives you a long list of rules and he says, don't do those things over there and you're fine. It's God has the right to command you to do even things that the rules don't discuss. So God can command us. All right. Also, there are things that we might be allowed to do, a whole variety of things that we are allowed to do. But those things can be ranked, right? Those things which glorify God more than other things that might still glorify God in some kind of way. The first principle and foundation would get us to understand that if God asks us to do it, if it glorifies God the most, we really shouldn't be picking anything else, even if it might also be kind of good or also be good enough. We really ought to be picking that which glorifies God the most. So our options of those things that are available to us, our options are rankable. They are rankable according to if they help us or don't help us, according to the end for which we were created, right? So there's this teleological anthropology. Since God created us and he can command us, it's because he's made us for a purpose. He's made us for a thing. So all of the things of this world get judged according to that, right? Whether or not they help us know, love, and serve God, or as St. Ignatius puts it, praise, reverence, and serve God. We can go into why those are different at a later date, but suffice it to say, do what you were made to do. And the things of this world are there to help you, or maybe even get in the way if you're not careful. Finally, you should be then indifferent according to the first principle and foundation. You should be indifferent, meaning that you don't let undue influences affect you. You only allow the good spirit to lead you. That is what's important about that first principle and foundation. Now, let's get into the discernment of spirits. It really is discerning these influences. If you can figure out where an influence comes from, then it can help you reject it or accept it. You'll know that this discernment of spirits is a very ancient exercise. I mean, you can find evidence of it in the Shepherd of Hermas, right? The first century writing all the way up through today. You find people in the Christian tradition trying to help you discern these spirits, that there's a strong belief in our faith, and I think it's undeniable, that there are influences that come to us. And those influences can come from a few different places. The first is that they come from me, right? Those influences are just me. I have in me virtues and vices. I might even have some infused, let's call it, a situation in my life where, I'm dealing with things like the fact that I'm human and we are creatures of the fall, right? That there's been a fall here, or also the fact that I've been baptized and there's some expected grace from that, but also just habits that I have developed, ways of thinking, ways of perceiving the world that I have an influence on myself that way. And you've, I'm sure, experienced this, right? If you think in a more physical sense, you might think about the way that, the more that you eat, the more you want to eat. And the more that you fast, the more power you have over yourself to be able to say no to food. And so in some sense, we're talking about virtues or vices there that are kind of built inside of you that are just part of who you are. But then also, God can influence you in a way that might be, that feels like, in a sense, something special, something outside of just the ordinary who I am. There are sometimes miraculous graces where I just feel myself drawn to God, drawn to the right thing, drawn to something, and beyond what I think I would normally feel like. I mean, beyond, like I say, gosh, that doesn't seem like me to be so drawn to do something so good. It must be God's grace that is coming to me in my life. That's very, very possible. It's also possible that God is helping your intellect. And so, not necessarily a feeling, but just the way that your brain grasps a concept or can be convinced of the truth, that you'd say, you know, I don't think I'm coming to this conclusion all by myself. I feel God's grace working and clearing up my intellect in some kind of way. So that'd be an influence from God. That is how God might work on the human spirit. Also, the evil spirit and his collaborators can also have an effect on you. The devil is real. Uh, yeah, the devil's real, and the devil doesn't want you to be everything that God wants you to be. Um, so it's foolish to think of the devil as this being in red pajamas with a pitchfork, you know, chasing you around. It's also foolish to uh, over psychologize what's going on. I mean, sometimes uh, you can find, especially today's modern mind, we want to understand the spirit in these purely psychological terms, and that can be very helpful. But it can also get in the way of understanding just the blatant truth about what's happening. Uh, I think a lot of times it boils down to this. This is just my personal opinion, but it seems like psychologists who aren't considering the spiritual life or who aren't considering your telos, right? Your the reason for which you were created. For them, their goal is to help you not be eccentric. Their goal is to help you not be something outside of the norm. And what they call normal means like they sort of look at it and look at the world and take a survey of everybody that's out there and say, you know, we see that there are extremes on either side of a spectrum, and we want to help you not be somewhere in those extremes of that spectrum. So for a psychologist, if you would say, is it normal to catch a cold? A psychologist might say, yes, it's perfectly normal to catch a cold. And in some way, they're right. It is common for you to catch a cold, right? For you to suffer a few colds in your life, no big deal. It's common. Nobody should worry about it. You shouldn't go to the hospital over that sort of thing. But in fact, if you ask a doctor, is it normal to have a cold? Some doctors would tell you, no, it's not, because you are sick. It is normal for you to be healthy. If you have a cold, you are sick. That is, you know, you should pay attention to the fact that you are sick and work on that. So psychologists are just way too often, I think, satisfied with getting you to be somewhere near what they think of as normal, which is like everybody else. And certain things don't bother them, especially in the realms of, take, for example, certain things about sexuality. They would say, well, as long as you have a big enough percentage of people that feel the way that you feel, you're probably well within the range of normal. And so no need to worry about certain things. Whereas if you are a real believing Catholic and you believe that God has made you for something, you might say, even though it's difficult for me to follow what God has made me for example, that's what I got to do. And even though nobody would look at me funny if I gave into my desires, still shouldn't do it, right? And so I want to be careful not to over psychologize a lot of these things. I also want to be careful not to leave psychology out. I think there's a lot of influences, not influences, a lot of good stuff going on there with psychology that can be very helpful. That I don't want to just take all of it and throw it away, but I do want to recognize the complex nature of psychology and spirituality and where they overlap and how many times and places they overlap, and that very often that's what needs to really be figured out, is the difference and the ways in which psychology and spirituality are similar and dissimilar. Okay. Also, I want to make another note too about direction, spiritual direction. Do not endeavor to be a spiritual director just because you think it would be interesting or you find it interesting or something like that. I would even go so far as to say, never offer yourself as a spiritual director. Wait until someone comes to you and says, hey, I could use your advice. And even then, say no sometimes. Even then, recognize that you might not be ready to help guide someone else spiritually, right? I would just say hold back on that as much as you can. It's really not for just everybody inexperienced and whatnot. You can really do a lot of damage this way. And so be careful. Okay. So sometimes God's grace comes to us in a way that is just completely obvious. It is this huge sort of intuition that we have to do the right thing. And then sometimes we have to do a little bit more focused intellectual applying our intellect on our experiences to do this discernment of spirits. And that's what I'm here to do through study and reflection of these spiritual exercises, especially the discernment of spirits. So, okay, Saint Ignatius, I think, is the first that I know of to write rules for the discernment of spirits that can apply to people who are in different places and different times. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. If you know of any saint before Saint Ignatius who took into account a person's state of life before they did a discernment of spirits, put it down in the comments and let me know. But I have looked around and I can't find any where they do what Saint Ignatius does by breaking down people into a couple of different categories and recognizing that the evil spirit and the good spirit and ourselves, that we influence ourselves in a way that is different depending on how we are living our life. I'm going to share my screen now for a little graphic that I came up with, and I hope that I'm technologically savvy enough to do that. Hang on. Okay. All right, here we have a little graphic that I came up with that is really based pretty closely on the discernment of spirits according to Saint Ignatius Loyola. I'm going to talk about it and I'm going to elaborate. The first is that we have people who strive to be good, right? Who strive to be good. Now, there's a whole other set of rules for people who are saints and who are already doing all the right things. Let's not get into that just yet. This is for your average guy who's just trying to do pretty good. He's striving to do good. And then you have some guys who are completely happy to be sinners. They're just moving from one serious sin to the next and not really worried about those sins. So how does the good spirit act upon the person who is striving for good? Well, I think God is likely to give that person courage and strength and consolation and, these holy tears of happiness and inspiration. This is how God works on those he loves and who love him back. And it's a good relationship between the two. Saint Ignatius describes it as like water falling on a sponge, right? It's like water falling on a sponge. The evil spirit is likely to give the opposite feelings, more or less, right? The evil spirit is going to try to make a person who's trying to do good things, who's striving to do good things, pain. He's going to make this person anxious. He's going to make this person sad. He's going to try to confuse this person, fallacious reasoning, whatnot. So we get a little bit, we see a little bit of the difference. Obviously, the evil spirit is trying to get you away from what God created you to do. The good spirit is trying to offer you some help to move towards what you've been created to do. And for the striver, that's how it's going to feel. For the sinner, God is not going to always feel like courage and strength and consolation and all this great inspiration. For the sinner, for the person who's moving from one bad sin to another, God's going to sting your conscience. God's going to try to make you feel remorseful. The good angels are the ones moving you to not feel good, right? The good angels are on a mission to let you not feel good if you are moving from one bad sin to the next. Now, what is the evil spirit going to do if you are moving from one bad sin to the next? Well, the evil spirit's going to say, here's something that feels good, right? Here's something that's pleasurable. Here are some sensual delights. Here are some gratifications making you feel satisfied somehow in your sins, right? And I would add a little bit to this. I would say that often you arrive there by the evil spirit saying, look, you can't be a saint. You can't be one of those good people. You can't be one of those people who are they're goody two shoes out there. They're way stronger than you. They are way holier. God might even love them more than he loves you. Don't worry about all that. Just go ahead and do whatever makes you ultimately gratified, whatever ultimately satisfies you in some kind of way. Now, that's the way that the evil spirit is going to talk to a sinner. Now, this gets kind of strange because if you think about it, let's say you're a sinner and you're out with some friends and you call them your friends. They're not really your friends, but you call them your friends. You go out to a bar. Everybody's having a good time. And man, you're drinking alcohol and everybody's had the music is loud and people are dancing. And you find yourself in a bathroom and somebody's, offering you cocaine on a toilet seat, right? And you're right there and you look at that and you say, oh my God, what have I become? What have I become? What a miserable feeling I have right now, that I stop and just sort of like recognize I've sunk down to this level. Holy smokes, I've really sunk down to this level. Uh, that bad feeling is actually a good feeling. That bad feeling is actually the right feeling. It's the way you ought to feel given your circumstance, right? You ought to be listening to that good spirit. And I don't think it's something that's coming from the inside, because inside you might have every reason in the world to want to chemically adjust your attitude. You might have every reason in the world to want to like really party hard so that these friends like you even more. And really just go ahead and cut loose, and you feel like you have every excuse to cut loose. But something inside is saying, this is wrong. This is really, really wrong. That's coming from the good spirit, because you are moving from one bad thing to another. Then I'd say the very same feeling of that if you are striving to do good things, you're helping out at a soup kitchen, right? At your church's soup kitchen, and you're feeding the homeless right there, downtown in your city at the cathedral or whatever. And you find yourself saying like, oh my goodness, I really should be home getting rest for tomorrow. I really need to get out of here. Even though I don't have anything going on tomorrow, I feel like I want to rest so that I can rest, this isn't me. Like, look at all these people. They smell bad. They're ugly. One of them's getting loud over there in the corner, and he might start saying bad things towards me and sort of verbally abusing me pretty soon if I don't get the heck out of here. You know, that sort of anxiety about what might happen that might make it worse. That sort of bad thing, that bad feeling that you feel about, I can't keep this up. I need something more than what God has given me. Those kinds of things, probably from the evil spirit, probably from the evil spirit. That if you just relax and take a deep breath and see what's going on, you'd feel a sense of real peace coming from God. And that evil spirit is what's giving you the anxiety. And you sort of feel both of those spirits alive in you, and you can push out that evil spirit so you can ultimately do what it is that God made you to do. That is a real discernment of spirits. That is a real figuring out of why you feel so dramatically pulled in one way or another. Now, this is true if you are attempting to go into a big discernment where you're trying to say, why am I pulled in this direction or that about major questions in my life? Should I get married? Should I join a convent or a monastery, the priesthood, whatever? You might be saying things like, should I be trying to space out my children, and make my family not grow so fast, or should I take this new job at this new work, or should I move out of the same town as where my parents are whenever they might be getting older? Or, these are real big questions that there are no clear answers for. To be able to get down to the bottom of all those answers, you're going to have to ask yourself, where am I being pulled? What's pulling me? Why is it pulling me? How is it moving me from one thing to the next? And from one feeling to the next? Why do I feel pulled in these different directions? And how can I make it crystal clear who's pulling me there? Let me stop sharing my screen and come right back. Okay, so I hope that that has made it a little bit clearer for you. This is a primer, right? This is the very beginning of what the rules for the discernment of spirits look like according to Saint Ignatius Loyola, and the rules that he's going to give us are going to be different for the saint, for the person who's really advanced in their spirituality. The rules where I'm going to go next are going to be for the person who is just a little bit more average, right? A little bit more average, maybe even a little bit more, maybe even more sinful than average in some kind of way. However, if you want to listen to those rules and you want to hear how all how that all shakes out, go ahead and subscribe, because I'm going to have to make it a part 2 to this video. So that the primer is just to lay out the sort of map of how things are supposed to go, and then I'll go through the rest of the rules for the discernment of spirits in a different video. I'm going to quickly look at the messages that are coming through on the live stream, and I see like, share, subscribe, smash that like button. Thank you, F2, because I would never ask for that myself. I would never ask you to like or to subscribe just for the sake of describing. Although you should subscribe so that you can see part 2, part 3, and all those other things. But I'm glad that somebody said it. Looks like Tom is offering prayers, and it looks like Hallelujah is happy that I'm making a video on the discernment of spirits. Very good, Haley. There's lots more to come. So listen, thank you all for watching this video. If you want to see the rest, keep your eyes open. I'll try to keep up with this, and I'll put them like into a playlist on YouTube. Allows me to make a little playlist. So I'm going to do just exactly that. So thank you for watching. God bless.